I'm Ashton from EventChain for Investment Pitch Media and FinTech News Network. And today on Blockchain Interviews, we have Joseph Weinberg, the co-founder of Shyft Network. Joseph, thanks so much for being on the show. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thanks for having me, Ashton. Pleasure to be here.
You're very welcome. I'm very excited to learn a little bit more about Shyft Network today. If you would start, I know that Shyft Network is a decentralized network protocol, but how exactly is it differentiating itself in the blockchain industry, and what specific solutions are you guys providing?
Yeah, we took a fundamentally different approach to a lot of the current systems today. We've been largely in the Bitcoin space since early 2010, and so been involved in many other protocols up until this point. We started Shyft about 2 years ago. The real focus of Shyft was to enable identity verification, validation, and the ability to send credentials across multiple different blockchains, multiple different networks, with a focus on institutional as well as more broad-based public network infrastructure capabilities. And so everywhere from banks, institutions, Bitcoin exchanges, regulatory bodies that we work with actually quite often, as well as central banks and governments have been a big focus of us. So kind of more around the larger traditional and kind of the ability to merge or bridge the more crypto ecosystem with the traditional kind of infrastructure space is really where we've been focused today. So
That's very interesting. And yeah, I was looking into Shyft. I know that there's a lot of fraud in trying to identify people, especially for microfinance and all of the financial services that blockchain can provide to the industry. So with Shyft Network, are you guys building in an identity protocol into the core layer of Shyft, or how does that work?
Yeah, so basically it's we look at identity, and I think actually the true goal of identity is to not have to give people your information to verify that in fact I am who I say I am. And so the question is kind of like, how do you derive identity? And really that's the big kind of question that we've really asked for the last 2 years. And so the identity network is effectively baked into the network itself. But really what Shyft works on is the ability to take data, assign it or validate it against multiple different participants. And by doing this, you're basically creating this kind of network of trust. And from there, you can start to derive identity or data or compliance requirements, et cetera.
Definitely seems like a differentiator in the industry. Not many are focused on identity. So if somebody was just looking at Shyft and comparing it to other blockchains, and they were like a blockchain libertarian or like a crypto anarchist, would they be scared of a network where they had to put their identity in? And or would it be comforting, as you mentioned, that there are no centralized parties that actually are privy to this information? The information is, if I understand correctly, my identity being on the blockchain is encrypted and only I have access to that?
Yeah, so we don't hold any identity information ever on top of the blockchain. The blockchain maintains GDPR compliance as well, so we ensure that privacy of the data itself is only stored across the participants that you already work with. So you might be a Bitcoin exchange, you use it every day. It could be a government passport system. No data sits on the network. We just create an encrypted way of you to validate or use those different trust anchors, as we call them, or institutions to certify or validate on your behalf without having to violate any privacy requirements. So it's really about how do you enable more confidentiality and more secrecy, but more transparency and ability to access better information at the same time.
That's really interesting that you brought GDPR up, and that's been a topic with blockchain, as many people understand in blockchain that once you put something on the blockchain, you can't really remove it. Now, if I understand correctly, let's just say I was going to go buy some cryptocurrencies from Coinbase and they required my identity and it was on the Shyft network. I could authorize that party to have my identity information, and as the way I understand it from how you explained in the beginning, it's sort of a zero knowledge proofs sense where I can send it to them and they don't really know the details of it, but they know that I've proven my identity. And I guess with the GDPR compliance, I could then revoke my my authenticity towards Coinbase if I wanted to remove it. And if that's true, then is it also possible to remove it off the blockchain completely? And does that make it not immutable, or how does that work?
Yeah, so because the identity information isn't stored on the blockchain itself, it's more of a receipt that, in fact, I have worked with someone. It might be Coinbase as an example. There's a certain revocation process where we can basically disvalidate that existing or that former receipt. Of course, it depends on the compliant requirements and varies based on the use case. But effectively, you're providing consent from the customer to ensure that I'm allowed to use this information. In the event that you have to retract that information, you basically have a re-verification process to basically de-anonymize the transaction and the address from the person itself. And so that's a lot of where our focus has been. The other big area that we've been focusing very heavily on is a solution to the financial action task force and the KYC problem that the ecosystem has today. So this kind of all plays into the exchange question of how do we passport information? How do we make sure identity information is more secure, and that exchanges can actually passport this information on behalf of customers without violating all of these privacy problems that we have today. So.
That's great. And how has the development been for the Shyft Network? When did you first start the development, and at what stage in the roadmap are you currently at?
Yeah, so we started about 2 years ago. We've been working on the ideas for closer to 4 years with a lot of early participants in the ecosystem, but we've heavily worked on development the last year and a half. Network's ready to launch in the fourth quarter. We have major institutions. We have government projects with the government of Bermuda that will be announced in the next few weeks that are going into phase one for identity systems at the nationwide level, and as well as working with some of the largest Bitcoin exchanges in the world on solutions to global governance and compliance problems. So we're quite advanced in terms of projects in most cases in the space today.
That sounds great. And how about your team? How large is your team right now? Do they have expert knowledge in identities or just blockchain before? And are you guys growing?
Yeah, we have quite a diverse array of people across very hardcore core developers and more protocol level developers. The team size is about 35 today. And of course, we have other partner companies that are kind of joining and working collaboratively across different areas and focuses of the network itself. A lot of us came directly from the more encryption and cryptography side, and of course into the blockchain side, and then kind of expanded that plethora into much more traditional business as well. And so we kind of have a very broad array of kind of expertise across the table to make things actually work. So
that's great. And was the idea of incorporating this identity and the way that you've developed the Shyft Network completely from scratch, or did you have some role models in terms of other blockchains that are currently running right now?
Yeah, so we worked heavily with a company called Blockstream for much of the early days in the Bitcoin space, and we were looking very heavily on new ways of building participatory systems across different exchanges and different types of use cases that dealt in heavily regulated environments, and how we could basically extend new privacy capabilities for the customers and these projects or these exchanges. And so a lot of our early works came off of these new types of designs. Of course, we're always looking and seeing what are the problems that exist in our ecosystem and how we can make those a reality for not only us, but the broader world itself. So a lot of combination from a lot of different areas kind of all come together to make it happen.
And what does the roadmap look like for the next 6 months? You mentioned that you're launching the main network hopefully by the end of this year. Is it just head down in development, and what needs to be done?
Yeah, so we'll announce phase one of some of our government projects in the next month or so, and that'll be a big focus. The project will launch in the fourth quarter, so the main network will be live and ready. We'll be working on a lot of optimization after that as well. And we'll actually be heavily focused on taking the network. It's really focused on interoperability. So we'll be actually distributing its smart contracts across multiple different blockchains so that it gains this kind of security surface across many. And then heavily focused on releasing a global solution to compliance for all the Bitcoin exchanges around the world today to allow them to secure their passport information. So those are kind of the big projects and a lot of the development focus at least.
That's great. And one of the major topics that's been hot, especially with Bitcoin and Ethereum, is scalability, and also the consensus algorithm on how transactions are verified and how that can be done faster. What has Shyft Network done with their consensus algorithm, and will it be scalable enough from the mainnet launch to support the entire world?
Yeah, and so the way that we've taken approach is two things. We believe that proof of work and the way that Bitcoin works today is very important for security. But we also look and realize that you need different layers to be able to accelerate or speed up certain types of business processes. And so basically what we've worked on is the ability for Shyft's interoperability bridging layer to actually start to work across other networks to leverage or gain the advantages that these networks hold. So certain processes run faster on EOS as a faster blockchain, as an example. We should be able to use Shyft's core infrastructure logic across certain blockchains to perform faster operations. And so the idea is that you have this layer that assigns and proves this data across everyone, and certain types of requirements will happen in certain types of blockchain environments, depending on the use case that's required. And we see this as kind of the next phase of being able to do a lot more collaborative interoperability, a lot better ability for projects to actually work across diverse ecosystems and kind of conform to certain types of requirements when required. So
that's great. And one thing that is of existential importance once the mainnet is launched and to grow adoption is to have a good developer ecosystem that allows for people to easily create dApps and make usable platforms on top of the network so that they can actually gain users. How are you guys planning to have this developer ecosystem? You know, are you working on that right now? Are there any dApps that are sort of coming out for Shyft Network, and how do you foresee that playing out?
Yeah, so we took a very logical approach at working with the Ethereum community very closely. We're also, originally from Canada, and so we were involved in the earliest, fundings and development of Ethereum. Actually, a lot of the co-founders are early collaborators of Shyft as well. And so we took a very heavy approach to making sure that everything we were building would work across existing applications in the Ethereum environment and would also be able to gain in a lot of the innovation happening. And so from that perspective, we have about 3 to 5 dApps that will be coming onto the network to basically initiate or start, kind of the engine, as we call it. And one project that we've been working on very closely called Alchemy is a project that came out of Techstars in New York. They'll be working on Shyft as well to gain in the advantages of interoperability and cross-network bridging as well. So a lot of areas that happen in identity as well as outside in kind of more traditional DeFi space. So.
That's great. Now, we've talked a lot about the development and the technical side, but I'm interested in the business side, and not just dApps, but the network itself and how that's going to play out. Is there a business model built into Shyft Network, or some kind of economy, or some kind of token? And how will the investors or holders and interested parties in Shyft Network grow their value?
Yeah, so it works very similar to how Ethereum functions today. Gas is used in order to execute transactions against smart contracts. The big difference is that it's not only meant for monetary transactions, in that all of the data requirements that sit across all participants in the network. So let's say I'm one Bitcoin exchange and I have to transmit information to another one for compliance requirements. You're basically paying the cost of data retrieval, data discovery, and data transmission across the entire network itself. And so it acts as a kind of more of a data market in some context, I guess, in many ways. And so the currency itself is mainly used and derived for those types of purposes. And that's kind of been the main focus. The revenue model is very hardly focused on how you basically make the cost of writing data transactions and, of course, processing transactions from a data perspective very cheap and accessible to enterprises. So the way it's designed is so that, whether you're a MasterCard or you're a NASDAQ with millions and millions of users, you can actually use this network without sacrificing any type of scalability, throughput, or cost requirements that are usually required in most blockchain contexts today. So it's been very well architected and designed to ensure that it meets the needs of both the current existing market and future markets to come.
Great. Yeah. And is that Shyft coin or token available right now, or will that happen at the mainnet launch?
No, mainnet launch will start working on its use cases. Its use cases will initialize out all of the actual distribution of its tokenization and currency model, and it'll be working over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years actually on a distribution curve. So.
Great. And Joseph, what are you guys looking for right now in terms of, I know you're working towards the mainnet launch, so are you looking for more developers, or are you looking for more investors or strategic partners right now?
Yeah, always looking for more partners. We've heavily focused on the enterprise space, but of course, more people kind of involved in that data area broadly is always interesting. And mainly looking for developers, new ecosystems, new people working on new interesting projects that we can either help, push over the line and kind of help them work on the ecosystem, and kind of people that are interested in kind of that overall topic. So.
And how do you incentivize developers when there's so many blockchains coming out now, and a lot of people are interested in developing on Ethereum or EOS? How do you convince them to develop on the Shyft network?
So the beauty of it is that if you're working on EOS or anything on Ethereum, we look to see whether or not you'll port parts of your smart contracts and just use parts of Shyft in the existing EOS dApps that you're building, as well as Ethereum. So we're not asking you to move everything to Shyft. but just extend Shyft's API base so that you can now use parts of its function without sacrificing the existing system infrastructure. So working across everyone, basically. So that's kind of the focus.
That's great. And if you are interested in getting more developers, how can they reach out to you and learn more?
Yeah, on Twitter, at Joseph Weinberg or at Shyft Network. Of course, you can send us a telegram at Shyft Network as well, and pretty much every other place at Shyft Network that you can think of. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Joseph. That's all the time that we have for the interview today, but it was great learning about Shyft Network, and all the best in leading up to the mainnet launch. Let's follow up in the near future and see how Shyft Network has grown.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.